At the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, when the whole world was under lockdown, do you know that the traffic in porn sites was more than the traffic in Netflix, Twitter, and Amazon combined? Now, in a world where human trafficking and rape continue to rise, this stat must concern us. Now, don't mishear me. Sexual desire is good. Sexual desire is actually given by God. But what I am saying is when our lives are driven by sexual desire, it causes problems. If the thing we turn to when the world is on lockdown, when everything changes, is that we turn to porn to try and find some kind of escape for our souls, it's not a good sign. It's not a good sign as to where we find our comfort, where we find our worth, where we find our escape from this world. Now, you've already guessed it. Today, we're speaking on the deadly sin of lust. And I want to give you a quick definition for lust. But before I do that, I'm reminded of Genesis, right? That you remember when Adam and Eve were standing before the tree, and the tree that they were told not to eat of, and Moses goes on to tell us that they weren't even allowed to touch it. They're standing before this tree, and the Bible says when they realized that the fruit was pleasing to the eye, they took of it. Right? That there is a lust that takes place through our eye gate when we see that something is pleasing to us, even though we know we ought not to take of it, even though we know it might not be good for us, we partake of it because our desire is driving our lives. So, what is lust? Lust is the unbridled sexual desire, the sexual appetite that tries to govern the intellect and the will. It is being enslaved to one's own sexual appetite. It's when we objectify another person for our own personal and sexual pleasure. So here's what I know about lust. As someone who struggled with this sin since I was a teenager, here's what I know. Lust will derail you. If you're trying to go down a particular path, whatever that path is, you want to stay in your marriage, you want to be pure in your singleness, whatever it is, lust will derail you. It'll move you off course. And so I want to help you see how you might notice when this derailment is beginning to take place. 1, what are you eating? 2, what are you thinking? 3, what are you worshiping? So, what are you eating? 1 Peter 2 verse 11 says this, "Dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul." You see, when we consume sexual desires, when we consume sinful desires, they wage war against our soul. They don't comfort it. They don't satisfy our souls the way we think they will satisfy. They wage war. See, we live in a time where people separate what we do with our bodies to what we experience in our soul. The reality is what you do in your body impacts your soul in a real way. Soren Kierkegaard says this. He says, "A life driven by feelings is ultimate slavery." A life driven by feelings is ultimate slavery. In other words, that your sexual desire is so strong that you cannot control it. You have to serve it, right? You have to serve it. And when you serve it, when you act out on that temptation, when you act out on that desire, it eats at your soul. It wages war internally in you because you caved to the feelings, you caved to the sexual desire. You weren't able to control it. You are letting it control you. See, Jesus says this in Matthew 5, verse 29. If you want to deal with sexual sin, he says, gouge your eye out. He says, cut off your hand. If your eye is causing you sin, take it out. If your hand is causing you sin, cut it off. Now, before you go to the kitchen, hold on, right? What Jesus means is this: you better deal decisively and intentionally with sin. The temptations that you're going through, the temptation in and of itself is not sinful, but what you do with the temptation, right? That's the issue. And so if you're at home and you know you're tempted when you watch this, and you know you're tempted when you are reading that, deal with it decisively and intentionally. But also, I want to point out this, not just temptations, but also triggers. You see, you need to starve the triggers in your life that are asking you to feed it, right? That are asking you to keep eating and consuming in order to satisfy the trigger. You see, your trigger might be, I'm overworked, I'm overwhelmed, I'm feeling anxious. It might be, I'm underwhelmed. Whatever it is that triggers that thing in you that goes, oh, in order to deal with this moment, I need to partake of sexual sin. That trigger, that's what you need to do. You need to starve that trigger. Secondly, not only what are you consuming, but also what are you thinking? Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Isn't it interesting? Adam and Eve, when they were standing by the tree, the issue was not that they were thinking about the fruit. The issue was that they couldn't stop thinking about the fruit. They couldn't stop the thoughts of, man, if I eat of this, what did it mean for me? Who will I be if I partake of this? See, this is why the Bible encourages us to take captive every thought unto the obedience of Christ, right? Why? Because if you don't take your thoughts captive, your thoughts will take you captive. Point number 3, we don't just need to be aware of what we are eating or thinking, but what are we worshiping? 2 Timothy 2 chapter 22 says this: run, right? Not take a walk, not jog. You ought to run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts, right? Here's what I want to say about this. You see, whatever we don't run from, we abide in. And whatever we abide in, we worship. Lust needs for you to run from it, right? It is so powerful in its deception and in its ability to entangle us that you do well to humble yourself by admitting that you might not be able to control this apart from Jesus helping you. So running is really helpful. You see, St. Augustine says this: give me chastity, but not yet. See, I was afraid that God will heal me of my lust too quickly. I was afraid he would heal me of the disease which I prefer to satisfy than to suppress. What's he saying? Saying the reality is, lust is hard to deal with when you love it. Lust is hard to deal with when you love it. And the only way you can deal with lust is that you need to change your love. And if you are going to change your love, you need something greater. You need something greater to love, greater than lust to love. This is why the gospel is so powerful. So let me ask you a question. Are you able to control not only what you do, but also what you want to do? Are you able to control the desires of your soul? You see, the beauty of the gospel is this: it doesn't just empower you to live differently in terms of what you do, but it also changes what you want to do. It changes what you want to do. And how does it do it? It's quite simple. The way that it changes what you want to do is that we change our love when we realize what loves us the most. Whatever you think loves you the most is what you are willing to love the most. And when we look to the cross and look to the resurrection, what we see is that what loves us the most is Jesus. Is that which that has sacrificed its life for us. And when we turn to Him, He doesn't just help us with what we do, but He heals our hearts from our own desires. He also changes the motives for why we do the things we do. So, you want to combat the deadly sin of lust? The way you do it is through self-control, but a self-control that's governed by a new love. A new love. When your love for God governs your life, it will empower you to have self-control in the area of lust. Something that we cannot do in our own strength.